Coming up next, well, Downing Street has said that the government will not back away from its demand to kick off negotiations on a post-Brexit trade deal as soon as possible. But, of course, Jean-Claude Juncker has slapped it down completely today by saying we need to be crystal clear. We will commence no negotiations on the new relationship over economics and trade between the UK and the EU until all of the other questions are resolved. They want a big divorce bill. They want the future of EU citizens guaranteed. We're at stalemate. What do you think would constitute a sensible compromise? Call me on 0345 60 60 973. Yes, that's right. It's Nigel Farage, and I am standing in for Ian Dale on Drive every day between now and Friday. And the topic for the last hour of the show, yes, it's back to Brexit. That's not because of me, it's because of what's going on out there. And it's been interesting, hasn't it, that so far in these negotiations, it's been Monsieur Barnier chiefly leading for the European Union, making a whole series of demands on us. We have to guarantee what will happen with the Irish border. We have to be clearer about the status of EU citizens living in the United Kingdom. And, of course, there is this huge exit bill that has been, from what I can see, plucked out of the air and kind of presented to us. And the British government, to date, have been saying, yes, we will go along with your negotiating strategy. You ask us to jump, and we keep saying how high. But, by the way, at some point, we'd like to talk about the next trade deal, and to do that as part of a package that we can't agree any one thing until the whole package is agreed. And I've noticed over the course of the last 10 days or so that David Davis appears to be getting somewhat impatient. Well, I think he's going to remain impatient because we had Monsieur Barnier yesterday saying that the British negotiations needed to be taken more seriously, done with a tone of condescension that only an upper-class Élysée French bureaucrat could possibly do. And today, yes, it's that man Juncker, back from his summer holidays, saying we need to be crystal clear that we will commence no negotiations on the new relationship, particularly a new economic and trade relationship between the UK and the EU, before all these questions are resolved. So what they're saying is, OK, we're going to buy the house from you. You give us the keys, give us the deeds, and we'll tell you later on what price we're going to pay for it. It simply doesn't work. They're being wholly unreasonable, in my view. In fact, I've said in the past that, frankly, they're behaving like gangsters. Now, that's my view, and I would say that, wouldn't I? I've been there for over 18 years. I've done battle directly. I know all of these individuals, but I do want also for a sensible Brexit deal, and one that works in everybody's interest. So, what would compromise a sensible compromise position between the two sides? Let me know what you think. Is it possible at all? Call me on 0345 60 60 973. Where should these negotiations be heading? And if there is to be absolutely no backing down from Barnier or Juncker, does a point come where we simply have to say, I'm very sorry, but we're wasting our time here. We're wasting valuable opportunities that we have with the rest of the world. We're out of here. I don't know. Ben from London Bridge, what do you think would be a sensible position for both sides to take?
Good evening. I think I'm not sure about the European side of things, but for Britain, I think we need to put a very clear message to our counterparts in Europe that we need to look at our strength. We are probably better off without them now that we made up this decision, and I think there's no reason to feel compromised, or if we want to do something as a gesture of goodwill, then that's fine, but we shouldn't be obliged. There should be no compulsion to do anything of the sort. And I think before we even go into any discussion or negotiation, we should have a very, very clear stance about how we're going to proceed, and telling them that we're quite better off with them, and hopefully we would do better once we're out of the EU.
Yeah, I mean, Ben, I think we have an incredibly strong negotiating hand because, you know, they need us in economic terms very much more than we need them. And we're beginning to hear the voices of Bavarian businesses saying, for goodness sake, do a sensible deal with Britain. We need that market. But the problem, Ben, is, and again, and I'm not going to draw any comparison between the war of words between Trump and North Korea. That's on a whole different level to this. But in a sense, the problem is that I don't think that Juncker and Barnier can be rational about this. Because rationality says, I tell you what, you leave political union, but we will have a simple free trade agreement between us, just as we've got with Canada and several other countries. And given that you're our best marketplace in the world, hey, this all makes sense. The problem is, Ben, the reason we're not dealing with logic is they know if we're seen to leave this club, to run our own lives, to be free to engage with the rest of the world, and to have a sensible trade deal with the EU, their worry is it'll bring the whole house of cards down because, you know, sort of in a fortnight after we've got that, the Danes will say, we want it, and so on and so forth. And that's the problem, Ben, in my view.
Can I please add something to it, maybe slightly irrelevant, but I think their livelihoods depend on running this EU show. And if
oh gosh, yes,
Britain
and very good livelihoods.
Yes, and if Britain leaves and becomes a successful independent country within a matter of months or a few years, and why there is no reason then Spain and France and Italy and whoever would want to do the same thing, if they become slightly more flexible with Britain when it comes to the negotiation, they would have to face more consequences dealing with these countries as well. The EU would collapse anyways once the Britain is out of it. I think they're just trying to extend themselves onto the life support for as long as they can.
Well, Ben, you've got to understand, Ben. You've got to understand, Ben, that for a lot of these people in Brussels, it's a very nice, comfortable, good lifestyle. Long holidays, great packages, top rate of tax of 16%, great pensions, and an endless number of cocktail parties to go to and fun things to do. So it's a great lifestyle. Ben, tell me, how did you vote in the referendum last year?
I voted to remain.
Yep.
Because I was off the... I'm still, if we go rewind, I'm still of the opinion it is a better thing for countries to stick together for, many reasons. But I'm also of the opinion that once you've taken a decision, I respect, the decision of everybody or rather the majority to leave out. I think that Britain is in a very, very good position to tell the whole world and the EU that we can survive. I think we don't need to feel worried about what's going to happen to EU. And if, like I said in the beginning, if we want to do anything, it should just be a matter of goodwill. Once we're out of it, we shouldn't be responsible for anything else. Asking us to pay this huge amount of money is simply ridiculous. I think it's outrageous.
Very interesting, great argument, and somebody there, folks, who was a Remainer but accepts the result and says, let's make the best of it and recognise we're not in a bad place. Steve says to me on Twitter, Mr Farage, what on earth will we talk and tweet about and argue about once Brexit is over? Steve, I have a feeling this is going to go on for a very long time. Walk away. Then the leaders of the other EU countries can tell their businesses why they can't export to the UK without huge tariffs. I get that on Twitter. Well, yeah, it is a point of view. It is a point of view that we actually have a very strong hand indeed. Tim from Chesterfield, what would a sensible compromise be in your opinion?
A sensible compromise
Or is it not possible?
A sensible... Because, of course, it depends what side you sit on, isn't it? If I went to my bank and said, this bond that I signed up for, that the bank said would offer me so-and-so interest in a certain number of years, well, I've decided I think I'm going to cancel it and I'm going to take my money. And if there are terms and conditions, you can whistle. if I said that to my bank and I'm going to take my money, they'd say, hang on a minute, there's terms and conditions here. What makes you think that Britain is such a special case that we can just walk away?
Oh,
why
Tim,
is Britain so special that we can walk away?
Oh, Tim, with political will, we can do what the hell we like. Of course we can walk away. Of course we can walk away. The question is that the right thing to do? And let me surprise you, Tim.
Nigel, have you no idea how stupid this is making Britain look?
I know. The idea that we become...
Stupid this is making Britain look.
What, the idea that we become an independent democratic nation like 200 states in the world?
We've been made to look like total idiots.
What, we should be governed by Mr. Juncker, you mean?
There are terms and conditions.
Right, OK, Tim, let's deal with those terms and... Right, fine, listen. By the way, Tim, let me surprise you here. I am actually not at this stage suggesting we get up, stick two fingers up and say to hell with you. I'm not suggesting that. And I think there is a compromise, and it's this. Article 50 makes clear, once we've concluded whatever it is, we have no further obligations. However, the EU has a spending round that lasts for a 7-year cycle. And this particular spending round goes on until the middle of 2020. And we signed up to that. I mean, I didn't vote for it, but we signed up to that a few years ago. And I think we should honour that. And that, to me, is the compromise. The compromise is that, yes, we will meet our legal obligations up until the middle of 2020. But, Tim, what is utterly bizarre is the concept that Monsieur Barnier or somebody is going to pluck a figure out of the air like 50 billion euros that we owe them. And that is just, frankly, plain unreasonable in my view.
Can I just say, Nigel, I appreciate people with a strong will and an independent mind, and you've done a heck of a lot to represent somebody with a strong will. You've gone through plane crashes, you've gone through personal... well, I don't want to sort of pry, but you've gone through a lot personally to be where you are today. And I've got to respect that. But please, you will struggle to find a UKIP voter or most people who voted out that could quote that point that you've made about the spending terms. Because then they're concerned about going back to the 1950s and Britain being great again, and good grief, this is a fantasy.
Tim, you will always get, on both sides of the argument, people supporting the argument making views that you may not necessarily agree with. Let me promise you this, Tim. I believed in Brexit because I believe in the independence, democracy, self-government of our nation, and I also believe that in the 21st century, if we're going to be successful, we've got to go global. And I think the EU was really seriously holding us back. But, Tim, I just said, I'm prepared to compromise and meet our obligations up to the middle of 2020, and then I would feel, we'd more than met our responsibilities. Do you think that constitutes a reasonable compromise?
You know what? I think it does, but we don't hear it. We don't hear it.
Right. Well, Tim, let me promise you, you'll hear it from me. I'm going to be as reasonable as I can about this. We're not going back to the 1950s. We're heading forward into the 21st century global economy. Tim from Chesterfield, thank you very much indeed. OK, the time now is 6:15. The Brexit Secretary, David Davis, is saying, come on, guys, let's talk about a future trade relationship as part of this renegotiation package. But I'm afraid that Monsieur Barnier and Juncker have shot back and said, no, we're not talking about trade. We're not talking about a future relationship until first you agree to pay us a bill, tell us what will happen with the Northern Irish border and the rights of EU citizens. And I'm asking you, what would constitute a sensible compromise between the two positions, or is one simply not possible at all? Let me know what you think on 0345 60 60 973, text 84850, tweet at LBC, using the hashtag Farage on LBC. Let me know what you think. JP from Cornwall sends me a very interesting text. He says, have I missed something here? If the EU has given us the bill, how much is it? And is it itemised? Well, JP, is very interesting. So the speculation began that it was going to be 50 billion euros. And I was in the European Parliament, and Barnier was sitting there just a few feet from me, sitting next to Juncker. And I said, is this 50 billion figure right? If it is, can you tell me how you arrived at that figure? Have you not simply plucked it out of the air? He said nothing. And a week or two went by. And the Financial Times, always helpful, the Financial Times, or, wanted us to join the euro, wanted us to remain, supported the exchange rate mechanism 25 years ago. And the Financial Times said it could be 100 billion. And I asked the same question again of Barnier. He said, no, it won't be 100 billion euros. So at least we know that. No, there's been no itemisation whatsoever, and frankly, I've sort of equated it, JP, to it's rather like a ransom. They're treating us like we're a hostage. We're not a hostage. We're free to go. We're free simply to walk away. I don't want it to come to that, but unless they're prepared to compromise, then I just don't see quite what David Davis can do. I wonder whether Herbie in Harrow has got the solution.
You are joking, Nigel. These people don't see you, they don't hear you, they don't even talk to you. All they do is keep coming up with demands. Demands that are, not rational. They are completely out of touch. They really don't care. They've got their own agenda, and I'm afraid we don't come into that agenda. And you know that as well as I do. We're not going to win the day. They're going to make it very difficult for us.
Well, they are making it incredibly difficult. I mean, they are repeatedly saying that everything must be done on their terms. And actually, David Davis and the British government to date have been pretty blimmin' reasonable. I mean, more than reasonable. We've been incredibly generous so far in all of this. I think believing, Herbie, that logic says that a sensible trade agreement is so much in their interest. But I worry that what Barnier and Juncker are doing is defending the political project of the EU. They fear it crumbling. So, Herbie, you think they're totally unreasonable. And it's interesting that Mr. Varoufakis, who was the Greek finance minister, wrote a book about this and said, you can't negotiate with this lot. What would you do then, Herbie? Would you simply walk away? Or, what would you do? If you were David Davis, right now, what would you do?
I would say I want my P45 now. Thank you very much. You've had more than enough from us. We bought the assets of the EU over the years. Does that come into the equation? It doesn't appear to. And I mean to say, what more and how much more do they want from us? As you just said earlier, where's the breakdown? I did ask that earlier on in the week. Where's the breakdown of what this 50 billion amounts to?
Well, Herbie, In my reasonableness, I'm saying we should meet our obligations up until the middle of 2020. The bit I didn't add...
You're too kind, Nigel.
I know everyone's been saying that for years. But also, Herbie, I would like some rationalisation of what our assets are. Because we have money in the European Investment Bank Central. I mean, we've got money in this thing. So we'll meet our obligations of what we owe to the middle of 2020, but could they please tell us what our shares are worth? Wouldn't that be nice?
Exactly, Nigel. So we know if we get on a level footing, then perhaps we might be able to negotiate a better deal. But as I said earlier, they don't see us, they don't talk to us, they don't hear us. And when you got deaf heads and everything else, what do you expect, Nigel? They really don't care. They got their own agenda, and as I said, we do not come into that agenda at all. It's their own game. They're playing their game, not ours.
Herbie, thank you. Herbie from Harrow there, very pessimistic about the direction that all of this is going in. Kevin from Doncaster, perhaps you have the solution, the compromise that is needed to bring the two sides together.
Hello, Nigel Farage, my hero.
Oh, hello, right.
My hero. And millions of other British people. Nigel, what you did in 2016 was a miracle.
I must admit, some days I still think, gosh, did we really win that? Because beating the establishment is not easy. But the position the government now finds itself in, and, David Davis is the Brexit negotiator, Kevin, and I shared platforms with him, all over the north of England and elsewhere, so I know that he's sincere in wanting us to get Brexit on the right terms. But is there a sensible compromise, Kevin, we can reach with these people, or frankly, is it going to prove impossible?
I think if the likes of Bill Cash and Jacob Rees-Mogg and yourself was in charge, we would have left by now on a really good deal.
So is this because the British government are, frankly, Remainers who are not strong enough in these negotiations? Or, what's your view on that?
Well, Mrs May is a Remainer, and I don't think she's strong enough. I don't really know about David Davis. He doesn't look strong enough now that he's coming up against the top people in the EU. We need someone like you, Jacob Rees-Mogg, people like that who, are going to back this country to get where it...
Well, the thing is, Kevin, I'm certainly not there. And Jacob may be sitting on the back benches, but I don't think he's anywhere near the front benches at this moment in time. So we've got what we've got. Does a point come, Kevin, where we simply have to walk away, in your view?
Well, like you said, we've got to look at the assets that we gave. We gave a lot of money towards the European Union, and we have to look at, where that money was spent, and does it owe us any money?
Well, I think that's right, and I think that should be assessed. I mean, maybe we own a share in all the buildings because they're assets, and we've certainly got some money in the banks and investment vehicles. Kevin, are you optimistic, as a Brexit voter, are you optimistic that it's still going to happen, though?
We've triggered the Article 50. We're three-quarters of the way down there. We're not going back.
Yep.
We will be leaving the European Union.
Absolutely. And Kevin, later on, after this show, do you know what? I'll drink to that. And thank you very much indeed for your call. The EU Commission can't be negotiated with. It's virtually a waste of time. David Davis has an uphill struggle to get anything sensible from these obstinate functionaries, says Richard in Chelsea. Well, it certainly isn't easy, because they're not being very logical. John from Malvern, what do you think?
Good evening. Good to speak to you.
Good evening.
First point, I believe Barnier and Juncker will continue the process ad infinitum. They don't want us to leave. They're frightened to death regarding the money that won't come into their coffers. And the first part of the process of our politicians to fall apart is this business with Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. I just cannot believe, after 3 months from their manifesto,
I know
how they've changed it. It's just beyond my comprehension.
John, and we debated this. I debated this between 7 and 8 last night, and it was very difficult to find anybody, particularly Labour voters, supporting this complete 180 that they've done over the course of the weekend. But, John, tell me, do you think it's possible that we can reach a reasonable compromise in Brussels with Barnier and Juncker, or are we just barking up the wrong tree?
I would love to think we could, but I think at the moment, with their attitude, we're barking up the wrong tree. And therefore, that brings me to my second point.
Yep.
I think we should set a deadline. I think, whatever that deadline is in terms of a date, should be considered closely. Say, if you are not really going to sit down and negotiate properly and come to a sensible agreement that suits both European manufacturers, English manufacturers, trade, etc., then what's the point of all this?
Well,
and then the third point...
John, John, 2 points is all I can give you, but it's interesting, isn't it? Because actually Article 50 was supposed to be the deadline, and now we're talking about transitional arrangements going on for goodness knows how long. John from Malvern, I thank you for your call and your 2 points. I want to hear from you. Tell me that the EU are being reasonable. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me we need to bend and give them everything they want before we can even start to discuss trade. Call me on 0345 6060 973. Tell me what that compromise is. I'm Nigel Farage. Now, I'm asking you, what constitutes a sensible compromise with Monsieur Barnier and Monsieur Juncker? Because they're telling us they won't even discuss future trade relationships until we agree first to all of their terms. What constitutes a sensible compromise? Or is it perhaps simply not possible at all? Let me know what you think on 0345 6060 973. And I'm going to Heathrow next to Murad. Good evening.
Hello, good evening, Mr. Farage. First time calling your show?
Well, you're very welcome. It's not my show, it's Ian Dale's show, to be honest with you, but I know what you mean, and you're very welcome. Now, tell me something. Is a sensible compromise possible with these people?
I'm slightly dubious whether that is actually possible or not. I think in any art of any negotiation, you have to, when you step into the negotiation, you have to be prepared to walk away. And the other side needs to know that you are capable of doing so. Because at the moment, I mean, it could be as simple as buying a pair of shoes or walking out of the European Union, basic still up the way. You have to be able to walk up there and say, right, these are our terms, try and negotiate a reasonable one. And I don't mean, like you say, plucking up a figure, whatever they want, 50 billion, 60 billion. It needs to be a reasonable one, meet our obligations, financial obligations, but then no more. As soon as they start, stepping out of line, asking for unreasonable things, then we need to show them that we can walk away, and we're prepared to do so.
You could argue
the only way for us to get a result.
I mean, you're absolutely right that any business negotiation, the other side have to know that if you're not happy, you're walking. I understand that completely. The trouble is, I think the EU have started off on such an unreasonable footing, haven't they?
Well, that's right. I mean, and I think that's what they're doing. They're trying to feel us out. They're trying to see what we are going to do about it. And how we react is very important, because that sets the tone for the remainder of the negotiations. And if we're always, if they're making demands, and we need to be making equally, extravagant demands to show that we are not going to be pushed around. Because if we do that, we have lost before we even started. And that is the base for any negotiation. And I think, it's just unreasonable for them to come over and say, even the tone of how they're talking. They are the bosses of the negotiation.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, they are the masters of Europe, Murad. These are the bosses of 500 million people and all the power and trappings that go with it. And doesn't it just show in these negotiations? And I must say, I thought Barnier yesterday was incredibly haughty. I mean, frankly, just looking down his nose at us. Murad, were you a Leave voter or a Remain voter?
I was a Remain voter, but nevertheless, I don't like people, trying to take the mick out of me and trying to, abuse their position, and I don't like that. And quite frankly, more and more, if I had the same goal at the referendum, I'll be voting the other way.
Interesting.
Because I think they're unreasonable.
Yeah, no, but do you know what? Very difficult to argue with anything you've just said there. First-time caller, Murad from Heathrow, thank you very much indeed. Interesting, isn't it? Two of the strongest arguments we've had tonight for how these negotiations should go and why we should stand up for ourselves against unreasonable behaviour have come from Remain voters. This idea that gets put out so often in parts of the media, both written media and indeed some television media, that somehow all Remain voters are furious. They feel the future of the nation has been betrayed, could not be further from the truth. Elizabeth in Shrewsbury, what compromise would you put on the table if you were in David Davis's position?
None.
None,
right. No, and as I said to your researcher, the main reason is this. Audited accounts from any company have to be put forward in law if you are going into any negotiation for either increasing or decreasing your business.
Yep.
How long has it been, because you've got more knowledge than I have, since the EU produced legal audited accounts?
Oh, I think you're being a bit harsh on the EU, Elizabeth. I mean, it's only been 20 years.
Right.
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
Yes, I thought it was 22. So we are now in a basis where they're presenting a bill to this great country, and there is no legal basis whatsoever. They have plucked a figure out of the air.
Oh, yes.
Now, of course, this is now, as I said to your researcher, a dangerous situation. The Labour Party are telling the British people that they are going to ignore the Brexit vote, which is akin to communism, which links in with John MacDonald standing up in Parliament and showing the little red book in our House of Commons.
That may or may not be the case, Elizabeth, but what is for certain is that Corbyn and MacDonald this week have allowed themselves, by pressure from their own backbenches, to effectively join Juncker and Barnier in trying to make life as difficult as possible for this government. And given that this government, Elizabeth, is putting into place the will of the people as expressed in a referendum, I, like you, take a very dim view. Elizabeth, thank you. Rather backing her up, Graham says to me on text, we should stand firm and call the bluff of these blackmailers. We should not give in to bullies. Juncker and co are deliberately causing uncertainty to try and keep the creaky EU edifice together. Well, that's a point of view. I'm Nigel Farage. Well, an hour ago I said that Donald Trump had landed in Corpus Christi in Texas, and since then he's been addressing the press. So let's get more on this from Simon Marks, LBC's US correspondent. Simon, good afternoon.
Good evening to you, Nigel. Donald Trump very much in Texas at this hour.
And this, no doubt, because he did not want to be seen to be like President Bush from Katrina 13 years ago. He wants to sort of get there and roll his sleeves up effectively.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, you know, historically speaking, Hurricane Katrina was obviously the point at which every future American president realized how not to handle a hurricane.
Yes.
George W. Bush, of course, excoriated for his handling of that storm. And President Trump has been telling reporters that he wants people to look going forward in 5, 10, 15 years at the way in which the authorities in Texas and the federal government here in Washington reacted to Hurricane Harvey as the new textbook for how you go about doing this. He was very calibrated in his comments down in Texas over the course of the last hour, mostly leaving the talking to Governor Greg Abbott of Texas and some of the other officials there who have been leading the rescue and recovery efforts. He made it very clear that he believes that those efforts have been largely successful, but he said, look, I'm not going to offer congratulations because we're not doing congratulations on an event like this. Perhaps when it's all over, we will be able to congratulate one another. And it is by no means over, Nigel. You've got the death toll in Texas now at 12. One of the dams in Houston has spilled over at least a little bit for the first time after record rainfall has hit that particular city. And there are now concerns not just about what happens in South Texas, there are concerns about Louisiana and New Orleans, which of course was in the eye of Hurricane Katrina back on George W. Bush's watch. This storm is now beginning to dump substantial amounts of rain on New Orleans and on Lake Charles in Louisiana, and everybody here in Washington is worried about that becoming another possible second front as the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey continues to spill through the south of the United States.
Yeah, no, horrible. And does Trump now stay in Texas, or is it back to the White House? How's he going to play this?
Well, very interesting. He's coming back to Washington after receiving the briefings that he's getting in Corpus Christi and meeting some of the people who have been dealing with the situation there. But the White House has already told reporters he will be returning to Texas this weekend, we believe on Saturday. And look, I think there's no question that from a political perspective, President Trump is eager to continue demonstrating that the plight of those people in Texas, perhaps also in Louisiana, who have been so caught up in this dreadful storm, is absolutely uppermost in his mind. And by returning there this coming weekend, he'll have a further opportunity to keep the headlines focused on his government's response to this storm, which for him will be a very welcome break from the headlines that otherwise might be dominating the news cycle, because headlines are continuing to be made here about the Russia investigation.
Yes, and there are plenty of those. Simon, thank you very much indeed, and keep us in touch over the course of this week. That was Simon Marks, LBC's US correspondent, making the point that a dam is beginning to overflow. We heard that levees were breaking on rivers earlier, and that this situation in the States is far, far, far from over. Now, before the break, we had a caller in Elizabeth, and we had a texter in Graham, who were basically of the view that we're dealing with wholly unreasonable people in the shape of Barnier and, of course, Mr. Juncker. That's one side of the argument, but look, tell me that they're wrong. Tell me I'm wrong. I mean, tell me actually the EU are being absolutely reasonable, and we should do everything they say before we even discuss trade. I'd be very happy to hear if there are people out there that believe that. Call me, perhaps Bob Geldof, someone like that, I don't know. Call me on 0345 60 60 973. Meanwhile, we go to Paul in Skipton. Paul, is there a reasonable compromise that can be struck here?
Well, it's difficult. And first of all, I'd like to say, no, you're not wrong, and those other two callers weren't wrong either. But there's two parts to this, isn't there? There's the budget that Cameron committed us to for 2020.
Yes.
And then there's whatever figure that they believe we should be paying. Now, if we start with the budget, I've tried as much as I can to find out what that is. I mean, if you think about it...
So have I, Paul. So have I.
A budget means there's a total, doesn't it? You know, like in any account, there is a grand total, and we're committed to paying a percentage of that.
Yep.
So surely somebody knows what that figure is. So that's the starting point. What is that figure?
Well,
you know, and then we can agree to pay that till 2020. But with the second part of it, where they claim that we owe them some money, well, they've got to justify. If they feel we owe them money, they've got to prove it. And as Elizabeth said earlier, they can't even audit their own accounts. So they certainly can't approve this figure, or they certainly, in some ways they're not capable of doing so. And I bet you Davis has gone to them and gone toe-to-toe and says, OK, you want that figure, tell me how you arrived at that figure. And they simply can't. So what do? They say, well, you, Britain, have got to come up with a mechanism for arriving at the figure. This is absolutely ridiculous. So until sensibility actually happens, how can we compromise or do anything?
I mean, what David Davis is doing, I'm sure, and he will know, of course, the figures that they're talking about. What David Davis is trying to do, sensibly, I guess, is to pull all the strings together in one, and so that we have an overall package that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, which is the kind of position that the UK government has taken. And that's reasonable, Paul. My worry is we spend up to 2 years on this negotiation. At the end of it, we might either get nowhere, or the European Parliament, of course, could veto the whole shooting match. And that's what really worries me, is are we wasting years of our lives? Are we effectively not getting on with our global mission, tying us up in something? And I just worry, do Juncker and Barnier and people like that charming Mr Verhofstadt in the European Parliament, do they actually want this to fail because they feel it's their job to hold this project together?
Well, these people live in a bubble, as you well know. They're not really attuned to their own voters. Now, most of their voters, certainly in the Parliament, only in the Parliament, should I say, are German car workers, French winemakers, etc., etc.
Oh, yes.
So are they going to sacrifice their jobs for the greater good of the EU project?
There's not one of them.
When it comes to
There's not one of them, Paul, that I want to. And this idea that it's just the silly old Brits that are Eurosceptic, I promise you, you travel around France, you meet exactly the same division of opinion on this as you do in this country. No, absolutely, and I totally agree with that, Paul. Paul, I thank you very much. My last caller, I've quickly got time for Morris in Edgware. What about a compromise, Morris? Is it possible?
Good evening, Nigel. Well, what I want to say was we keep on hearing about Mr Davis, Mr Barnier, Mr Juncker and the EU, but they don't run businesses. And companies in Europe, companies here, depend on each other to trade. And it's about time that all the business people turn round to the EU and say, blow you lot, we're doing what we want to do. We don't, you depend on us for business. We don't depend on you to run our businesses.
Do you know what, Morris?
Completely...
Do you know what? I'd love to hear that voice, but all I get are the CBI and the people that have always supported the project and supported us joining the Euro. And I agree with you, Morris. We not only need the voice of business, we can also do, I think, with a few businessmen helping in those negotiations. Morris, I've got to end it there because that's me done for today. Thank you for your company. Yes, I'm back again tomorrow at 4 p.m. on Drive, standing in for Ian Dale.